You ever have one of those mornings where everything that could go wrong does, and before you've even had your coffee, you're ready to throw in the towel? Yeah, that was me last Tuesday, except it wasn't just any day. It was the day of the most important job interview of my entire life. Picture this. I'm scrambling around my tiny apartment, half dressed, with a head full of wild, panicked thoughts about how every chance I've ever dreamt of seems to hinge on this one moment. So there I was, finally grabbing my phone to check the time, and bam, the screen stays stubbornly black. Dead, completely out of juice. I swear, I stared at it like I expected it to suddenly come to life and start yelling, "Relax, man, you got this." But no such luck. My phone was as useless as a chocolate teapot, and with my interview downtown, I had to get moving fast. I threw some keys on the counter, thinking my old car could at least do its part. Spoiler alert, it couldn't. I jiggled the key, I pounded the steering wheel like some kind of amateur mechanic desperate for a miracle. Nothing. The engine just wheezed and died, leaving me alone in a car that wouldn't start and a phone that refused to call my only lifeline, my best friend Alex, who always seemed to have a plan. Now imagine me, standing in my driveway, sweating like it was the middle of a heat wave in a city that was anything but tropical. Seriously, I was the human embodiment of a stress ball being squeezed too tight. And yet, I had to get to that interview? How? I had no idea. The day had started with the usual hope, woke up on time, made a mental list, even rehearsed a couple of answers on the way to the bathroom. Then, bam, phone dead, car dead, and time slipping through my fingers like sand in a sieve. I remember muttering something that probably sounded more like an incantation than an actual plan. Okay, one step at a time. You can freak out. But here's the kicker. How does someone with everything going sideways still manage to get through the door to the interview on time? And more importantly, how do they not completely bomb it once they get there? Because, trust me, the universe wasn't done messing with me yet. At that moment, all I could do was start walking toward downtown, suit in one hand, hope in the other, and absolutely no clue what was waiting ahead. I wouldn't know until later just how much that day would change everything. But for now, I was on a mission that already felt like a wild adventure no one asked for except me. So there I was, trudging toward the city center with my shoes clicking on the cracked pavement, juggling my wrinkling suit in one hand and trying not to dwell on the fact that I was basically a walking disaster. Fresh out of college, desperate to land my first real job, I'd pinned all my hopes on this interview. The kind of job everyone says you need to kick off your career, but feels like it might as well be on another planet when you're just starting out. And here I was, feeling about as out of place as a cat at a dog show. Midway through my slow march, I decided to stop at this little cafe I'd never really noticed before. Cute little place, had that cozy vibe with mismatched chairs and some indie art on the walls, the kind of spot where baristas seemed like they might moonlight as poets. Jamie was the barista's name, a perky guy with a smile that almost made you forget you were being judged for ordering decaf coffee on a Monday morning. And decaf was my new normal because the nerves were doing a better job keeping me awake than caffeine ever did. Jamie looked at me like he knew what I was about to face. "Rough morning?" he asked, sliding a cup of plain black coffee my way. At that point, black coffee felt like the closest thing to a miracle I could get. I shrugged, trying to sound casual but probably failing miserably. "Yeah, you could say that." Jamie leaned on the counter like he was about to spill some ancient wisdom. "Look, I've seen a lot of people freak out before big interviews. But here's a tip nobody tells you. Don't try to be the perfect candidate. Be the real you. They want the person, not the resume robot." I almost laughed. It sounded too simple, but maybe that was the catch. "You're some kind of barista turned career counselor?" He grinned. "Nah, just a guy who's seen his fair share of awkward moments." It was the kind of advice that stuck in my head even after I left the cafe, which was good, because the next stop on my anxiety roller coaster was the office building. The place was one of those mid-sized glass towers downtown with a lobby so shiny you could see your future reflected back at you. If your future involved sitting under harsh fluorescent lights and pretending to know your own resume by heart. And then there was Karen. I had heard about her from Alex, my best friend, who insisted I brace myself. "Karen's a bit of a legend," he said. "Not the good kind. Picture the HR manager who doesn't just ask tough questions. She looks like she might mentally grade your life choices while you answer." Sure enough, Karen was waiting in the interview room, flipping through my application like she was deciding whether I was worth the paper it was printed on. Sharp suit, sharper glare, and an aura that screamed, "I've grilled 50 candidates before breakfast." I nodded a polite hello, trying not to look like I wanted to curl into a corner and disappear. Then came Mike. Ooh, Mike. Now, Mike was this guy who sauntered into the waiting room with the confidence of someone who's been here before and not just here, but winning. Coach's pet, captain of the debate team, probably the type who'd use phrases like game changer in every sentence. He caught my eye and gave a grin that was maybe a little too wide. "Ready to crush this, huh?" he said, like we were already competitors in some reality show rather than just human beings trying not to embarrass ourselves. I gave a tight smile, not wanting to start a war but also not planning to back down. Might surprise you. While I was steeling myself for the inevitable verbal sparring or whatever version of it Mike had planned, I noticed something odd. From the corner of the waiting room, I overheard a snippet of conversation between two staff members walking past. Tay, the merger's hitting delays again. Karen's not happy, says this could push the launch by months. That sentence dangled in the air like a storm cloud I hadn't seen coming. The company was supposed to be this shiny, well-oiled machine, and here I was hearing about delays and frustration before I even sat down. Suddenly, that position wasn't just some entry-level gig. It was the kind of job tied to high stakes in office politics. If the interview went well, maybe I'd get on board with the changes. If it went badly, well, I wasn't exactly bursting with backup plans. Sitting back in the lobby, I felt that familiar mix of excitement and that creeping self-doubt. Was I really ready for this? For all the challenges, the pressure, the Karen factor? But I couldn't let that stop me. I looked down at the crumpled suit in my hand, took a deep breath, and thought, guess I'm about to find out. So, there I was, standing just outside this big glass building, kind of like a deer caught in the headlights, minus the flashy lights but with about 100 reasons to be nervous. My phone was still dead, my car still stubbornly silent, and now the clock was practically doing jumping jacks behind my eyes. Without a phone to call for help or even to distract myself with memes, I had to figure out plan B fast. That's when this woman, seemingly out of nowhere, stepped up and asked if I needed a hand. She introduced herself as Sarah, and she was on her way to work too. When I explained my parking lot disaster and phone's heartbreaking silence, she just smiled and said, "Hop in." I'm heading toward downtown anyway. I hesitated for a heartbeat because, who accepts rides from strangers these days? But hey, desperate times, right? I threw caution to the wind and hopped in, dataless, phoneless, and frankly, emotionally drained. Riding shotgun, Sarah cracked jokes about the city's infamous traffic and how she once tried to parallel park for 15 minutes straight during a police watch. That got a laugh out of me, and honestly, it was the first time that morning I felt anything other than sheer panic. By the time we reached the building, my heart was still racing, but at least I wasn't about to collapse. Stepping into the elevator, I spotted Mike already there. He shot me a smirk that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. "Made it just in time, huh?" he said, eyes gleaming with that smug, "I'm already halfway to the finish line" attitude. I just nodded, trying not to let his confidence get under my skin. Then came the moment I'd been dreading, walking into Karen's office. The room was this cold, minimalist cube of corporate efficiency. Karen was already seated behind a huge desk, eyes narrowing in what I guessed was either scrutiny or mild annoyance. She didn't waste a second. "Sit," she said, voice sharp enough to cut through steel. As I took my seat, I could feel the intensity in the room ratcheting up. Karen's gaze flicked between me and my resume like she was sizing up a puzzle, trying to figure out if I would fit. The interview began, and honestly, I was surprised. It wasn't just a dry Q&A. She challenged me with scenario questions that made me stumble, and when I tried to answer with honest, straightforward responses, she raised an eyebrow and pressed harder. I noticed Mike's eyes on me during a pause, an amused little twitch at the corner of his mouth like he enjoyed watching me squirm. Later, during a break, he pulled me aside, not exactly friendly. "Hey, just so you know, they don't like people who aren't polished. You're coming off a bit, amateur. Might want to watch your step." There was that smugness again, the kind that says, "I'm already better than you." As I returned to my seat, the tension thickened when I suddenly recalled that snippet I overheard, the part about a delayed merger and Karen's frustration. Suddenly, the questions made more sense. This wasn't just about my experience or skills. This was about trust, adaptability, and being someone who could handle the pressure cooker the company was clearly stuck in. And then, just when I thought I was starting to get the rhythm, Karen leaned forward and dropped a question that totally caught me off guard. "What would you do if, halfway through your first major project here, you discovered the entire plan was built on faulty data?" I blinked. Seriously? That one threw me. It's the kind of question that feels like a trap dressed up as a curveball. The room seemed to shrink, my mind scrambling to find an answer that was both honest and smart. Only I had nothing ready. Here I was, sweating bullets, hoping I wouldn't sound like a deer in headlights. And that's where I was, sitting there with Karen's piercing gaze locked on me, feeling like the next words out of my mouth could make or break everything. I sat there, blinking, like maybe if I blinked enough times, the answer would magically appear on the ceiling or something. But nope. The only thing floating was my own rising panic. I could almost hear Mike smirking in the background. Or maybe that was just the soundtrack of my embarrassment. Then, somehow, a little voice inside me said, "Be real. Be Jamie approved real." So I leaned forward, cleared my throat, and went for it. Well, I began. First, I probably have a mini heart attack. Because, honestly, who wants to find out the foundation of their hard work is built on quicksand? Karen didn't blink. But after calming down, I continued, I'd dig into understanding how that faulty data came to be. Blame games are a waste of time, right? I'd want to fix the problem rather than point fingers. I paused and added, plus, I probably buy everyone in the office coffee while we figure it out. No project survives without caffeinated survivors. A flicker, just the faintest lift at the corner of Karen's mouth. It was like watching a stone statue do a little wobble. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. You're not the typical candidate, are you? Nope, I said, squeezing out my best I mean business, but I'm still human smile. The mood shifted. The tension in the room suddenly felt less like a grilling and more like a genuine conversation. Karen's questions became a little less sharp and a bit more curious. She asked about how I handled past challenges, and I told her stories, not polished ones, but the real, messy versions. Meanwhile, Mike's confidence streak, that self-assured haze clouding his aura, started to crack. I caught him in the hallway sneaking a glance at his phone, his usual cocky smirk replaced with a quick frown. Later, during the group portion, his answers sounded rehearsed, like he was reciting lines rather than sharing thoughts. The guy who once seemed unstoppable suddenly looked like he was trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. When the day finally ended, I left the building feeling a weird mix of relief and exhaustion. The whole thing had been surreal, a roller coaster that I'm surprised hasn't left me queasy. Then, a couple of days later, my phone finally buzzed. It was Alex, and right after that, I got the official call from the company. Yes, we'd like to offer you the position, Karen's voice crackled a little over the call. But I'll be honest, with everything happening here, it won't be easy. If you think you're ready for some serious challenges, this is your chance. I laughed nervously. I think I'm ready. More ready than I thought, really. Her voice softened just a bit. Good. Because this is just the beginning. I hung up, staring out over the city skyline from my tiny apartment window. The future was anything but certain, but somehow that felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. And as for what came next, well, that's a story for another time. But let's just say, sometimes the interview that changes everything isn't about the job at all. It's about the person you become along the way.